Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Ben Wildavsky. I'm Senior Vice President for National Engagement at Strada Education Network. And we're really delighted to have all of you with us today as we host this important discussion. We're here today to talk about a new vision for higher education after the pandemic. And of course, we all know about the massive disruption to higher ed caused by COVID-19. But have you ever thought there could be a silver lining? We're going to explore whether, despite all the pain it has caused, the pandemic could have far-reaching consequences for expanding opportunity. That's because the world we'll be discussing today, and of course it's one that's been accelerated by the pandemic, is a world where the offerings of universities, and not just the classes, but career advising, student counseling, and the work that happens on campus, all this is increasingly blending the physical and the digital worlds. So as a new report that Deloitte developed in partnership with Strada, the report points out that the retail model, where people seamlessly combine their online and their in-person shopping, really based on what works best for their preferences, their schedules, their lives, that's more and more the model that we're starting to see in higher education. And this has the potential to make higher education really more student-centered than ever before. And the big historical question this brings to mind is whether we could be at a new pivot point in US higher education. We've seen massive changes in access before, from the land grant acts in the second half of the 19th century to the GI Bill after World War II, to the enrollment surge at community colleges in the 60s and 70s. And of course, in the past few decades, there's been a lot of talk about the transformational nature of education technology. But we have to say there have been some false starts as well. There was the .com craze that brought us ventures like Columbia University's Fathom. There was what many would call the excessive hype around MOOCs. So now, will the pandemic be a true game changer for higher education? With this fantastic group of panelists, we're going to explore what could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to harness digital technology to enhance the student experience. I'm really fortunate to be moderating a discussion today with four very distinguished thinkers and practitioners. Cole Clark is Managing Director of Deloitte's Higher Education Practice, and he is co-author of the Hybrid Campus Report. Jeff Selingo is a New York Times best-selling author, a higher ed strategist, and co-author of the Hybrid Campus Report. Maurie McInnis is president of the University at Stony Brook and a scholar of cultural history. Marni Baker Stein is provost of Western Governors University, and she previously served as the chief innovation officer at the Institute of Transformational Learning for the University of Texas System. I'm going to ask Cole to kick us off by walking us through the fundamentals of what a hybrid campus is. Then we're going to hear from the other panelists with their views and analysis, and we're going to conclude by fielding a few questions from the audience. So please think about those as we go. I think I can see in the corner of my eye, many of you are using the chat. So of course, we encourage you to use the chat throughout and also to think about questions you might want to ask at the end. There is also a recording being made of this webinar, and we'll be distributing that recording to everybody who's participating today. So Cole, let's all start by getting on the same page. Tell us about, what is a hybrid campus? Why do we need it right now? And what are some of the big shifts that we should be looking for in academic content, in the student experience, and in the campus workforce?
Thank you, Ben. I'm gonna. I wouldn't be a proper consultant if I didn't have a couple of slides to share with you. I'm going to share just a few visuals. And by the way, thank you so much for putting this together and inviting me to participate in this. It's great to be with all of you today. I did want to give you a little bit of context for how this came about. Back in the spring and the summer, which I think to all of us now probably feels like a million years ago, but the virtual sky was sort of falling. We were all very, very fixated on what I like to refer to as the tyranny of the urgent, trying to solve for how we were going to get through the spring, the summer. Some of us were not even thinking about the fall at that point. But Jeff and I spoke, and Strada was very instrumental in this conversation as well, in trying to get a group of individuals together to, if only for a few hours, put those urgent issues aside and think more broadly about how some of these abrupt changes and this crisis would afford us opportunities for change that we may never again see in our lifetimes. And so with Strada's help, with Jeff's help, we were able to gather together a small group of leaders from across the higher ed spectrum. You have two of them here on the screen, Marni and Maurie, from their respective institutions, but we had about 25 others that represented a broad cross-section of the higher ed panoply, from large community college systems to small regional publics and privates to some of the largest private and public research universities in this country. And they agreed to, again, give up a very small amount of what was incredibly precious time at that point to talk about what some of these opportunities were and are, and also agreed to be surveyed so that we could put together some quantitative analysis of this, as well as some of the incredible anecdotes that we were able to glean from these convenings, which we called the New Era Forum. And out of that, Jeff and I and others were able to develop this monograph on what we see as the potential future for higher education. I just realized I'm not in presentation mode, so I'll correct that error. And we'll put a link to the paper in the chat, or send it out to you if you haven't already seen it. But we really, there were so many different directions that we could go in, Ben, to your point about potential areas for change and transformation. But I think the three areas that we felt were quite prominent in those discussions back in the summer were in these categories that you see on the screen. Rethinking how an institution not only decides what to offer from an academic program array or portfolio, but what not to do, and how to create linkages to the marketplace, if you will, and be much more nimble and agile, a topic I know that I'm going to put her on the spot, that Marni can speak to quite eloquently. And through that, look at developing new alliances and collaborations to help inform that dynamism, that change. Even rethinking sacrosanct things like the traditional academic calendar as a way to make the institution much more accessible to a broader range of individuals. The second area was in this notion of the human resources of the university or the college, and rethinking not only how work gets done, but where it gets done, by whom, how technology enhances the capability to be more flexible, and really using data and analytics in a way across the enterprise that makes the leveraging of that precious human resource more effective. And then the final area that we explored was in the arena of the student experience, and a term I love to use here that I borrowed from a colleague many years ago, Nicole Engelbert from, at the time, Ovum, fixate on this notion of a frictionless student experience, one that allows individuals to swirl in and out of the virtual and the physical. And in doing so, I mean, this is not a technological problem, as we discuss in the paper. It is as much about technology as it is about the way the institution is organized, and how all of these various handoffs that occur through the life cycle, the journey that the individual has with the institution is orchestrated and organized. And then the last visual that I'll leave you with before we jump into the discussion, Ben, is, and this is, I think, one of the most important parts of the paper, is thinking about what success looks like, and also what are the things that you really need to do in order to enable some of this change. And I think it goes without saying that strong and visionary leadership is a prerequisite. This has to be something that, you know, not only the line managers get behind, but the deans, the provost, the board, IT, human resources, all have to be a part of this effort. As you design these new systems, always putting the student at the center of that design, that thinking, and not the institution. You know, think about this from the perspective of the student, and making the institution more student-centric. Data and technology as enablers are critical. I think one of the issues that we have in higher ed is that we're incredibly rich with technology, but we're pretty poor when it comes to using data and information across the enterprise. We've got a lot of tools, but we don't always leverage them to their greatest effect. Rethinking some of the financial models, the incentives that are built into the way that money moves around the institution, as again, a way to incentivize entrepreneurship and inventive thinking. And then a holistic and an enterprise view to communications and inclusion. I think that is, we've got a lot of work to do in breaking down silos. Some of that got done as a function of the emergency that we just went through, this past spring and summer. Hold on to those, more joined up ways of making decisions, and including all aspects of the academic enterprise and decision making. So that's a bit of background on the thinking around the hybrid campus, Ben.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Cole. That's a fantastic overview, and it's a great way to sort of level set as we get going. I'm going to turn now to Jeff to talk about one more specific aspect of the report. You, of course, were a co-author, and you've also spent a lot of time writing about the connection between learning and earning. And I'm wondering, how does the hybrid campus make that possible, or even better in some ways?
I think, Ben, it helps us rethink of what services need to be done on campus and what needs to be done off campus, but it allows a more flexible operation as a result, right? Right now, when we think of the college campus, we may have hybrid operations on it, but the most likely focused on the classroom, for example. Right. So you might be able to take a class online and live on campus and take your other classes in person, or maybe an individual course is half online, half in person. But when thinking about the entire hybrid experience beyond the classroom, one thing it allows allows students to do in particular, is to, for example, they might intern off campus in another city for a short amount of time and be able to take their courses online. They may be able to participate in other student activities online, and then come back to campus and be able to integrate right back into the campus-based experience. It's that what really this offers is a flexibility for students at a time when we know that work-based experience or project-based experience, and we know this from the Strada research, for example, over the years, right, about what makes for a good college experience and good outcomes after college, it's largely focused on that work experience in some way, and whether that is a undergraduate research project or a graduate research project or an undergraduate work experience or internship experience.
Right. No, I thought the report has some really compelling, it obviously covers a lot of ground, but there's discussion about things like virtual job shadowing, or creating a virtual community where people can get help with job hunting, or even, alumni networks that obviously can work not only in person, but in a virtual environment as well. So I thought that was a really interesting aspect of the report. So look, let's turn to the practitioners. We're very fortunate to have a couple here, and I'll start with Marni Baker Stein. In his overview, Cole talked about these big three shifts, in the hybrid campus. And I remember specifically from the discussions that led to this report from this New Era working group, at one point you made a point that was very powerful, which was really that we have to think about a sort of 360-degree approach to supporting students. That it's not just about the kind of online classroom, that it's about a much broader set of services. I wonder if you could just tell us some more about what has WGU been doing and what have been some of the challenges and some of the successes?
Sure. So just as context, you know, as we get learner-centered, if this is the new revolution, we need to understand who we're talking about. The majority of learners today are non-traditional students. That is the new student. I think over 70% of students today have one or more categories in their profile of non-traditional. Some 40% of them or more are financially independent from their parents. They're working full-time. They're looking for part-time options. Many of them are caregivers to their families. I think over a quarter of them are parents. And so that's who we're talking about. That is particularly true at WGU, but that is true nationwide. And what we've found at WGU is if you want those learners who are the learners to be successful, you need to organize around them. You need to organize your operations and services around that individual learner. And that's where this notion of a community of care, a 360-degree community of care comes from, where every learner has a mentor, a longitudinal mentor that they're talking with weekly. There are instructors for every courses that are working individually with learners to personalize their pace through those courses. We have evaluators who, when students take their competency assessments, within 24 hours, get them very targeted, personalized, extensive feedback. And then, of course, we have all of our student services, whether that's writing center, ESL services, or other support services. And those individuals, they aren't in silos at WGU. They are a team that works together through our technical infrastructure to serve those students' needs just in time, which could be academic, but more often than not are logistical, or they are childcare, or they are financial, or they are other issues that really are causing the friction that Cole was talking about earlier in their pathway. And so that community of care is our most critical infrastructure. And I have argued before that I think it is the critical infrastructure for the future of hybrid models. Of course, even at WGU, COVID just hit our community of care hard. And we have learned a lot. There is still much more that we can do for students as this world that they're living in becomes more complex with COVID and beyond. And whether that's micro-lending, or whether that's childcare, or whether that's helping them to gain internet access, it's so critical to access to these modalities. We've realized that that's part of the work as well. And we've really had to even disrupt our own model to figure out what it's going to take into the future to make sure that every student gets the success that they're looking for out of their education.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I'm very glad you used the word team to talk about these communities. I think we'll probably come back to that before we get through all that we're covering. But now let's turn to, excuse me, to Maurie McInnis. I'm really very glad to have the president of Stony Brook here. Among other reasons, you know, you're a really large, highly respected state research university. I don't think that you have any plans that I know of to blow up your whole structure and become exactly like Western governors. But I do understand that you found during the pandemic that you have some hybrid approaches that are already helping you meet student needs in a variety of ways. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. I am the president of Stony Brook University. And if you do not know us, we are a public flagship for the state of New York. And I've spent my career at public flagships institutions, most recently the University of Texas at Austin. And we've always been a largely traditional residential campus, about 26,000 students, about 17,000 of whom are undergraduates, but also a little bit different from some other residential campuses in that not all our students live on our campus or even within say a 5-mile radius. We have many students who commute from elsewhere on Long Island, or maybe even in from the city. And in the pandemic, in flipping to mostly online, we've continued to have about 25 to 30% of our classes in person. But what we've learned are the many, many different ways, not just in classes, but in all those other important services that Marni was referring to that are indeed necessary to ensure the success of our students, that our students have so appreciated the flexibility that comes with the technology-enabled approach. So whether it was classes that were potentially asynchronous or synchronous, but even more importantly, perhaps our advising, our tutoring, our career counseling, our career fairs, all of which became predominantly online. And we've seen things like tutoring and advising appointments that go from a 50% no-show to now only a 10% no-show, or appointments with mental health counselors that also used to have a fairly high no-show, where our students are now making it. And what's changed in that work is that our staff have also begun thinking about it very differently. They used to be fairly bounded by a kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 approach. And of course, that's not when our students are most interested in having their advising appointments or their appointments with counselors. And now that most of our staff are also working from home, they've changed up the calendar on which they're working. And by using this more student-centered approach, by listening to what is working for our students, we realize that we will go back after the pandemic with a blend, exactly as you laid out in your report, Cole and Jeff, of offering both the in-person and the technology-enabled approaches. Our students are desperate for more in-person. They're really looking forward to getting back on our campus. We even have lots of students who lived with us this year who didn't have a single in-person class. But there are aspects to the campus experience that are also important to the students who choose to come to us. And so what we need to do is really understand where it is that they need that flexibility, and how do we both best meet their needs in order to support their success. And we will be changing.
Well, those are great examples. Thank you. I really like to think about it so concretely, like, you know, the reduction of no-show rates. If I think about all the ways for many of us just using Zoom for various aspects of our lives, obviously there are a lot of headaches, but there are perhaps some advantages. So it's great to have those pointed out. Let's continue for a little while with the practitioners, just to talk about how this moment really looks for university leaders. And then of course, we'll bring in Jeff and Cole as well. But let's start with Marni. You know, you've had a long history working on hybrid education at several major universities before you were at Western Governors. And I'm wondering if you were advising other leaders to sort of step back from the putting out fires, the crisis of the day. What are the design principles that you think that people have to start with?
Sure. You know, hybrid is an incredibly rich solution, and there is much to be considered to get this solution to scale. And I can just name a few things, and I will mention them blithely, but these are big shifts, as we were talking about earlier. One is campus logistics. All right. So if we have a hybrid use of the campus, and that could have many meetings, but if it's part online, part face-to-face, you know, how are we going to organize space differently to accommodate that? And how are we going to organize scheduling differently to accommodate that? Scheduling is a big part of the hybrid experience that can often throw a campus into a tizzy, trying to figure out how to take the current state and move it into a hybrid model that really allows for these pedagogical approaches to thrive. Faculty allocation, how are faculty allocated in a hybrid design where there are both online and perhaps more personalized experiences for students, as well as on ground and perhaps more project-based, problem-based team-based solutions for pedagogy? How do you allocate faculty to that in new ways? And how do you give credit for that allocation to faculty as they're getting their terms and straight? Curriculum and instruction design and support is very different in hybrid environments. Many institutions have been winging it over the last year. That won't stand. Into the future, we're going to have to figure out what is powerful about the hybrid design, and figure out what resources a campus needs to support that kind of pedagogical approach, both in terms of design and training. And finally, technical infrastructure is tested by true rich hybrid models, where students are coming into classrooms with devices, they're working together in those classrooms, they're going home and working together in those devices. How does a university support that? The IT organization, the CIO, has to be at the table to think about that into the future, to execute these models at scale and execute them well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, those are, I mean, obviously, those are important places to start. I wonder if we could, turning to Maurie McInnis, ask you about really your sort of next step priorities. You know, I'm thinking about, there was a nice little piece that Josh Kim wrote in Inside Higher Ed, reacting to the report, you know, from Deloitte, you know, with an assist from Strada, and he talks about what he uses this term fast incrementalism, where, you know, you can't boil the ocean, so you've got to start in a few places to really try to have the highest impact. And I'm just wondering, from where you sit, Maurie, you know, what are the next steps that you think are going to help not just take these well-known terms? A lot of people have heard of online or hybrid, and they may just think, oh, that's fine, but like, what do we have to do next to really make it effective?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'll admit I'm not sure I have the answer to, and I'm continuing to ponder it. And I think important thing for leaders to understand is that while we may feel like we know the path and where we need to go, we need to be very, I think, understanding of the fact that probably not all of our community is exactly aligned with us at this moment. I had a very revealing conversation with the executive committee of my faculty senate last week, and it's in, let's just say, their imaginary is that next fall snaps right back to where we were prior to the pandemic in everything related to education. And though we've done lots of surveys of our students and we've shared what we've learned with our students, with our faculty, I'm not sure they've absorbed fully that means that what we need to do is step back and think really carefully about our curriculum, listen to our students, and really understand the ways in which this flexibility is going to enable even greater success for them, access and success. And so I think for success, one of the most important things university leaders need to do is to both listen to their communities, to be empathetic with the fact that this kind of change is still very disruptive for many. And there's an education process that we need to be engaged in order to get the entire community aligned behind these priorities. I would say that in some of the other areas, our student affairs area and the ways in which we've engaged new students we've never engaged in the past, because we're doing more of our clubs and organizations online, and we're doing more virtual sort of hangouts and virtual support groups and virtual tutoring groups and so forth. And we've expanded the students we're reaching. I think they've really seen the impact of that and are understanding the data. I know that our Career Center has seen enormous success in having virtual career fairs because we've reached more employers as well as been able to connect them with more of our students. We've created an online both internship and experiential learning website to make those connections possible. And those successes have been perhaps a little more obvious and tangible than what's been happening educationally. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to encourage the conversations and the understandings between what our students are sharing with us and our faculty as we figure out how to redesign our curriculum.
Yeah, really fascinating. And, I do want to hold on to that question you raised about the faculty, because we'll come back to that in terms of thinking ahead about some of the barriers, or collaborations that need to be undertaken to make this work. But I want to try and touch on a couple of, I thought, quite compelling parts of the report that we haven't mentioned. And of course, Cole, because you're with Deloitte, I've just got to ask you a question about cost management and how the hybrid approach really plays into that. You talk about this hybrid approach as having a lot of promise for saving money at a time when, of course, there's huge concern in higher ed about revenue problems, both right now and also on the horizon. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what some practical steps are that campus leaders can take to use hybrid in a way that's both innovative for pedagogy, but also that does keep costs under control.
Well, I do think that it's a mistake to think about this as a methodology or a means to cutting costs. Honestly, it's really more, in my view, about making the institution more effective and efficient at focusing the resources on the things that matter the most, and not, there not being a lot of duplication or wasted resources on things that either could be done at scale or that could be done, frankly, by another, outside entity that's developed a capacity to do things at scale and therefore at a lower cost. But I really hesitate to characterize this as something that's a huge cost-saving move, and more of one that is about focusing the precious resource on the things that matter the most: teaching, learning, and research. And in those cases where research is a part of the academic enterprise. There is so much. The way that we've crafted our student experiences in most of our institutions is very siloed by school or college. It's very siloed by prospect to matriculant to alum, and those whole pathways are very disconnected in a logical and a physical sense. And I think there's tremendous economies of scale that could be gained by bringing that into a more joined up, making that much more coordinated. The other thing I'll say, Ben, is that I think that there is a tendency to think about hybrid. When the word hybrid is used, people immediately go to the classroom. They go to classroom instruction, and that's sort of where they think about these things being deployed. But in reality, I think, and Maurie and Marni may want to argue with me on this point, but I think we've actually made tremendous strides there. Where we have a lot of headroom is in the other parts of the sort of social learning that takes place that is not part of the formal classroom experience, and how we enhance that with technology, not just create alternatives with technology. That's the other issue I worry about in this period where we've been almost entirely online, is that individuals tend to think about this as standing up and spending resources on standing up systems that are going to be an alternative to what we've done in a physical sense. And what I wanted, and I think what Jeff wanted to get across in this paper, is that these are things that actually enhance the experience, not create an alternative to it. Frankly, I think even an institution that did not want to stray from their residential roots, even after the pandemic is over, would see significant benefit from instituting some of these capabilities. If you talk to Mark Becker at Georgia State, who we quote in the paper and who's been quite outspoken on this point, they were doing a lot of these things even before this wonderful pandemic was upon us, and found that it served them extremely well during this, this sort of period of emergency. But that they were already instituting in what was largely, an urban residential setting, some of these capabilities that were making the experience for their students as well as their faculty and employees much more much richer.
Yeah, I love the idea that, that it's, as you say, it's not just, the bean counting, not just saving money for the sake of saving money, although That's a reality for many people, but it's really trying to be additive, to enhance what already exists and to really take advantage of this. And just to add one more aspect of that, I want to ask you, Jeff, about something else that comes up in the report, which is the report really talks about how colleges and universities need to be thinking about how to survive and how to thrive in the future. And that brings up the question, and we don't really know what's coming down the road. Of course, nobody thought a year and a half ago we'd have a pandemic. If you're concerned about resilience, how does hybrid education help institutions build resilience for any kind of future disruptions that may come along?
Well, I think part of what we're seeing right now is that, we have an incredibly large and diverse higher education system. And I use that word system very loosely because we don't have a national system here in the US. But clearly we're starting to see a big bifurcation in the types of institutions that are doing really well, even in the middle of a pandemic, or I should say not really well, but doing well in a pandemic, and kind of everybody else. And to me, it is about the post-pandemic university is really about kind of separating yourself from the herd, right? You're going to have these top research universities and these top highly selective private universities. They could basically do almost whatever they want after the pandemic is over. Hopefully they will adopt some of these things in this report, but we have thousands of other institutions out there, I think, in order to survive and thrive, are going to have to look to other models. And there's a lot of benefits to this model. And there's one thing that Cole said and one thing that Marni said in the chat that I think are really important here. One is that where Cole was talking about that this is not an alternative, but an enhancement and on what we're already doing. And one of the enhancements I think that this really helps is something Marni brought up around the liberal arts, right? The liberal arts in particular are under a lot of pressure right now. We know that liberal arts enrollments in the humanities has dropped significantly, even at liberal arts colleges over the last decade, as people have fled to kind of the vocationalism of higher education. We know that that's probably going to be even more true after this pandemic, I would imagine. We know, Ben, from your reports from the Future of Work Institute at Strada, Strada's reports from the Future of Work Institute, the work that MZ does around kind of what are the jobs of the future and what are the skills of the future. We know, obviously, technical skills are important, but we know that human skills are also critically important. The human skills we believe, and I think to be the case, that are built in a liberal arts curriculum. Just imagine how we can offer that in different ways through a hybrid education, so that, for example, engineering students get the benefits of a philosophy course or an English course, and English students and philosophy students get the benefits of a data visualization and a data course, right? We're all trying to figure out how to do more in the same amount of time. And I think that this idea of a hybrid education, not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom, could enable us to do that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's a lot here, right? You're all, in one way or another, see just huge promise in the hybrid campus. The report lays it out, I think in great detail that I certainly think is persuasive. But, going back to, something that Maurie talked about and you've all alluded to, there's a lot of inertia in higher education. And despite all these changes, that were sort of thrust upon the sector during the pandemic, we know there are going to be pretty strong forces pushing institutions back to the status quo. So for this next round, I want to really open it up to some questions from this great audience that we have. But I wanted to talk about, how do you avoid just a complete reversion? How do we make it so that people don't see hybrid education, so they don't roll their eyes the way they do, about MOOCs, for example, in some cases, things that they feel like, oh, it's flavor of the month, it's going to pass, we'll go back to the way that we want to do things. If you really think this is going to be a pivot point, that it's going to be an important opportunity to build opportunity for more students, how do you keep the momentum going? And I'll just open that to any of you who would like to start first.
Well, I think unlike MOOCs, demand is going to drive this change. I think that the constituents are going to, having been through MOOCs were sort of something that was unique to our profession, our our sector. You said MOOC to somebody who was outside of higher ed and they wondered what planet you were from. You know, we've been through this pandemic as a society, and I think that is going to change the way that not only, you know, what we refer to as traditional students that are no longer traditional because they're outnumbered by those that are non-traditional, but that the demands that are going to be made on us as a sector to change the way that we offer our, I hate to call it a product, but you know, the things that we offer them is going to come from the demand side. So I think those institutions that are innovative and that pursue this are going to not only meet that demand. I think a lot of the folks that work for institutions, the employees, the human resource side of this are going to demand some of these changes. You know, Maurie, I'd be very interested in getting some perspective from you on how this has shaped, you know, the views that your faculty have about how they work and how they interact with students, and as well as some of the administrative personnel at your place. But I think it's going to be as much a pull as it is going to be a push.
Yeah, Cole, I would agree with you that it is, I think, going to come from both sides. I mean, what is different about this moment is we've all had the way in which we work and engage in our roles turned upside down at this moment. All faculty, all students, all staff, you know, all of us in America, right? Our lives have been changed, and students can be very powerful voices, and they will let us know where the technology enabled really does contribute. I love how you were talking about it. It's not that it's an alternative, it's that it is an enhancement, and they will let us know the places and ways that it enhances their ability to do their job. But I believe our staff will as well, because I do think there are many aspects of the flexibility that have changed the way they work and have enabled them to do their jobs better as well. That said, I do think it's also going to take focused conversation led by leadership to make sure that we know why and where we are going. Because otherwise it would just be scattershot, and I don't know if it would have the same impact. I think we need to be clear on what we want to accomplish.
For sure. And beyond conversation, or as part of that conversation, I really do think if we're moving in this direction long term, part of that has to be examining the incentives in place for faculty to join into what can be incredibly creative and joyful and work, right? Really building a learning and assessment and transformational experience for students is very powerful, fun work, but it is not incented really in the current structures where every faculty is owner of their course, right? And goes in and teaches that course on Tuesdays and Thursdays, either in class or online. And that's great. That's how it works. And there's some powerful lectures out there. I think what we've realized through COVID, or a bigger percentage of us has realized, is maybe that lecture isn't the most powerful thing to put into the digital experience. And maybe when we are together back on campus again, maybe we should spend our time not in that passive environment, but in a different kind of environment where we're solving problems together, where we're solutioneering together, where we're talking about things, right? And so I think, you know, everybody's starting to come to these conclusions, like, how do we value and spend our time together? That takes a different kind of pedagogy than most traditional universities have, especially in the first couple of years. How do we get that to shift? Part of that is recognizing that getting that to shift takes a team. It's not a bunch of individuals trying to do it on their own inside of their siloed classrooms. It is groups of really powerful, creative people coming together to figure this out and to design new environments that the digital component can truly enhance. I think every faculty member, lots of them would love to do that, but they aren't often incented to do that. And that has to be part of the solve.
Well, you know, there's such a powerful, you know, this idea of, you know, tradition and the individual talent, I think was the essay, you know, there is this very long-standing individualism that, you know, it's not of course true across the university, but certainly some parts of it, So that's obviously something to get people to think about this as a team approach using technology and a whole bunch of other things together to help students is obviously, going to be a sort of the next big challenge. But let me just get to a few audience questions while we have a little bit of time. There are many of them, and I'm really just going to have to pick a few. There's one that came from Larry Mineta, and he talks about, sees lots that's persuasive, about the benefits of the hybrid model, lots of utility for students. But he says, what about those who are seeking a communal experience? Who aren't just in, this is his term, who aren't just interested in a transactional relationship to their college experience. What would you say to Ernie Boyer, the great sort of higher education, I don't know what you call him exactly, he's just a leader, a theorist, somebody who really framed the way that a lot of people think about universities. I guess the question is partly, do you buy the premise? And what do you think, this kind of hybrid model means for community and some of the reasons that a lot of people do value those personal connections at college? Jeff, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think first of all, a community can exist in a virtual world as well, right? Obviously, people I think are missing kind of the physical interaction. We are social animals in a way that I think that we want to. This to me is the best of both worlds for that reason. So the communal aspect can still be could be started in person and can be then accessed online in a hybrid university. So I don't think this is an either or. I just think that we didn't have what we have. We didn't have the capabilities technologically in Boyer's day that we have today. And so I don't think he ever imagined this. And I think if he were around today talking about this, I think he actually would embrace some of the community aspect of this recently. So let me just give one quick example, Ben. I've been focused a lot, as you know, on admissions in recent months, and the ability for colleges and universities to recruit students in smaller communities, both physical, literal communities in Montana and things like that, are so much greater now because of the power of technology, but also communities of students who have similar interests, whether that is around social aspects of college or around discipline aspects of college, right? We can now have a college like Stony Brook, for example, can now have a virtual session for all those students interested in philosophy, for example, right? Where from all over the country, from all over the world, where we didn't have that before. To me, that is already building a community that is almost impossible to do in the physical world, the way we've always recruited students.
Yeah. Well, let me just go on, and before we explore more of this one, I just want to try and get to a couple of others. And one that, I think that, Jeff, you touched on a little bit, but maybe somebody else would like to weigh in. One of our audience members asks specifically about student career services. And how does the hybrid model offer opportunities to help students to transition to the workforce? Are there some specifics that you might be able to point to, maybe at Stony Brook or at Western Governors?
Well, I just quickly, I think one of the biggest ways is that it allows for simultaneous earning and learning. So it really allows for those students who are working full time to not only continue to do that while they're getting their education, but also to really create those bridges between what they're learning and the career that they're building outside. So one of the ways that we're working on doing this, and I know other institutions are as well, is we are building in any degree. And before I say this, this could even be in a liberal arts degree. We are building third-party certifications that employers are looking for, whether that's project management or whether that is technical skills or whether that is communication skills, that we're building those into career pathways or program pathways, so that as students are going through their degree, they're also getting these employer valued certifications that can help them build their brand as they're moving up in their careers. And the emergence of these really nice achievement wallets that allow students to then share those certifications directly with employers is another piece of this that just makes it easier for us to both surface, hey, this is the value of the degree you're getting or the certificate you're getting. These are the skills that are in demand near you that you can go out and apply for those jobs and articulate why you're qualified, but also make it easier to share those achievements and credentials directly with those employer HRIS systems. That is, I think, where this is going in the hybrid environment, both in terms of allowing students to work and learn, but also surfacing those insights to them just in time, I think is a really powerful part of what the future will look like.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Let me just throw out one quick one. There's such a long list, but this is actually speaks to me because I've been really interested in global higher ed over the years. Someone says, how is the hybrid model going to impact equity, diversity, and inclusion in the internationalization of higher education? And I guess what I will just add to that myself is, on the one hand, there's potentially great democratization, access, opportunity. On the other hand, we know from some examples, internationalization can also be a very elite phenomena. And I wonder whether hybrid makes a difference there. I'm not sure whether someone's starting to say something. I don't want to push you, but anybody have a thought there?
Well, I think it certainly has the opportunity to enhance what we as a sector have tried to do to make our institutions more accessible to foreign students. It's been interesting watching, frankly, some of the traditional residential institutions that have been walled off from their international communities because of either the pandemic or some of the immigration challenges that we've obviously all experienced over the last several years, and how they've tried to cater to those individuals using technology as a means to keep them connected to the institution. And to Jeff's point earlier, he was talking about the curation of these communities. I think it does provide a great deal of democratization, if you will, access that wasn't there before. But we also have to pay very close attention to some of the basic blocking and tackling that sometimes we take for granted here in this country in terms of the end user technologies and network access issues and things like that, that again, seem so basic and rudimentary. And, it's like background noise. We expect it to be there, much like electricity, at least unless you're in Texas right now. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
But in many other parts of the world, that's not the case. In fact, even in some parts of this country, that's not the case. So we really have to be careful and pay close attention to the last mile problems that this sometimes will introduce.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, look, we've explored a lot of really compelling possibilities today, and I really thank you all for sharing your insights, and thanks to our audience for their great questions. I'm sorry we can only get to a few. I'm just going to close with a very fast lightning round to ask each of you to just give us your closing thoughts on whether this moment is really going to make the hybrid campus a turning point in American higher education. And why don't we start with you, Maurie?
I would say yes, but not universally so.
Okay. Jeff?
I think one of the things that we've always thought about change is that we tend to think that it happens quickly, but we always underestimate the depth. So I don't think this will happen next year. I don't think this will be the year after the pandemic, but I think over the next 10 years, we are going to see a movement towards this model.
Great. Cole?
Yeah, I think the thing I'd like to leave everyone with is actually hits on one of the questions that came up in the chat, this individual that asked about embracing the rent versus own model. I think there's huge opportunities here among the public university systems to start thinking about this as a system, this hybrid notion as a system, and what they can share as a university system as opposed to standing these things up on their own.
And Marni, take us home.
Well, I think I'm going to speak as a parent here, which I don't often do, but For me, a rich hybrid experience wrapped in personalized digital experience for my girls, whether they're studying French literature or whether they're studying engineering, is exactly what I'd like to pay for. And frankly, I think it's what my girls will be looking for as well when they choose their school a couple years from now. So my
Great.
demand is changing, and I think that's happening broadly.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, thank you so much to our colleagues at Detroit, and thank you to my colleagues at Strada who helped make the publication of this compelling report possible, and to all of our colleagues behind the scenes who really helped make this happen. We appreciate the opportunity to explore the future opportunities to develop really a more student-focused university. And of course, thank you to our panel of authorities, Cole Clark, Jeff Selingo, Maurie McInnis, and Marni Baker Stein. It's really been great to hear your views. And we look forward to following your work and the opportunity to continue the discussion. So thank you very much.